Last year, I went to Twitter and asked for your webcomic suggestions, and I got a lot of them, 29 to be exact. And after months of deliberation, I'm here with 7 webcomics that I think y'all should give a look at. So without further ado, let's begin. Flowers of Etrea follow Cicelo and Tetherol on their journey to find a rose to heal Tetherol's dad, but it quickly turns into Cicelo confronting the sins of his past as a young Church slave, who helped bring into power the tyrannical iron industry, which has since subjugated most of Etrea in the past 100 years. Watching Cicelo and Tetherol's influence on old and new friends alike as they journey to the final showdown with Ondiox, the leader of the iron industry, was an intense journey as far as 19 chapters go. If I had to praise the story for anything, it's that despite the story's short length, the characters and world were all used to its fullest extent. Usually I'd have thought of some different takes or additional avenues we could have followed, but I think Flowers of Etrea did everything it needed to do. I'm not gonna go into too much spoiler territory, but I will say that Zama and Ondiox are really great antagonists. Ondiox in particular, having a commanding presence without having to do anything absurdly heinous to get a rise out of me, he's my favorite character. I also just love seeing how much Cicelo and Tetherol love each other from beginning to end. The compact paneling bothered me the first read through, but I got used to it. The selective use of color for thematic and plot reasons was definitely a nice touch, and it's weird that most of the black and white comics I've read in general don't do it. But most important of all, I love the fact that the story is short in the first place. I think in general, people should do that more, especially if it's their first like Rex's, as far as I can tell at least. So yeah, give it a read. It's short, you have no excuse. In a world not too dissimilar from our own, the barrier between man and technology slowly becomes non-existent through the new existence of the HUD set, aka the Neuralink's final form in like 80 years. Maddie wants to get one so she can feel more included with her gymnastics team, so against her mom's wishes, she applies to the Future Agents Youth program with a forged signature and gets the implant. Reading this comic brought me back to the YA novels I used to read as a kid, but in hindsight, it's probably marginally better. Maddie is spoiled and annoying as hell, but she has good character. What I like above all is how the consequences of her actions immediately punish what may be a critical flaw down the line, her carelessness. Like, by the time the HUD set is actually installed, she was already regretting the decision, but then she almost becomes another victim of a series of HUD set corruption cases. Then again, her carelessness did also save one of her friends from having that very corruption on audition day. The plot progression may be a little slow in the beginning, but it isn't to be confused with it being boring, because the drama always had me engaged. I've even mentioned the workplace politics between the different departments associated with the Future Agents, which is basically the cyber terrorism department. I think my only gripe is how stiff everyone is drawn. Like, I feel like stretching just looking at them. I'm really looking forward to who exactly the cybercriminal Yellow Jacket is, their ultimate goals down the line, and what the implications of the HUD set really entails. In Earthshine, lichens, basically werewolves, have been in conflict with humans for hundreds of years. After a close call with the SLPP taking his sister Yulia, Dyrus sets off to join them in secret, so he can hopefully change how humans perceive his kind. But 7 years pass and he's nowhere close to fulfilling that dream. The most he's able to do is help the license he sees without being caught. At least, that's what he thinks. Because of Dyrus' reputation among lichens, he and Yulia eventually helped the lichen camp in their corner of the city. So now they're teaching them how to control their powers, so they can work towards not being seen as unpredictable monsters. But the crazy part is that the leader of that very camp was on fraud timing! As he's part of a team of people trying to cure an old friend through turning people into lichens. I like how diversity exists in this comic, both in an artistic and story sense. For instance, the design of black characters like Adler and Dr. Neveu, specifically in the hair not being the same 2 to 3 copy-paste designs, as well as them being allowed to be who they are without adding the challenges their skin entails like it's an obligation. This isn't to say that such topics aren't worthy of discussion, but a minority character is more than their social struggle, which is important to note considering that the cast is majority white. Another thing that I noticed was that the 3D backgrounds blend really well in this one. So well that someone had to remind me that they were even there when I was taking notes. It may seem like a small thing, but it's something that I always notice when it's applied, so the fact that I didn't really impresses me. All in all, I feel like it's a story about where you fit into the equation of your community and the lengths you'll go for it. For that reason, I think I'm gonna stay in Sunenri Day a bit longer. SkyArrow follows a squad of high school friends trying to live normal lives as Partum users, people with specialized supernatural abilities, not unlike the stand users of JoJo's. And like the main cast of JoJo's, trouble usually follows them, whether they like it or not. Look, I'd like to think I've read a decent amount of manga-inspired action webcomics in the last few years, which is why it's bothered me that none of them stuck. But I clearly wasn't looking hard enough, because I was enjoying SkyArrow. If I had to guess what separates SkyArrow from the rest of its kind, it's that it's confident in itself. At least more than most. What would happen most of the time when I'd read action shonen likes, is that a better term? Is that they'd oversell the characters and story in the beginning, like they're in a rush to get me to like it. So I was naturally very weary about that possibly happening in SkyArrow. But that never ended up being the case. I was growing closer to the cast. I feel not only their desire to live normal lives, but to also build community with any Partum users they come to meet, because their world is lonely. A fact even more apparent when you realize the world's perspective on Partum users is of fear and disdain. I like the chemistry between Yoseru and Victor, and I think, as of recording, I like the antagonist group of the series. There isn't much that we know about them other than the fact that no Partum user is safe. I don't often fear the safety of MCs, but they got hands! And they're competent. All I'm saying is, after reading the Emerald Storm side story, I need guys to lock in. That being said, this isn't to say I don't have gripes about certain writing decisions. Take the first fight. I feel like it should have been the diner conflict and not the game in the woods. Or the game could stay, but include an emphasis on what happens if a Partum user doesn't use their abilities routinely, as seen in the Emerald Storm story. Whatever gripes I had with the visuals were mostly remedied after the first year of uploads, the major ones being the paneling and lettering. I love even more how much Cosmolonian experiments with the art to make the action more dynamic, though I do find myself having trouble understanding panels at times. If you want some fresh action shonen, I highly encourage to give it a try. Also, when you catch up, read the Emerald Storm side story. It's a nice fully colored treat to enjoy, especially after you get to know everyone. Circling back to the fantasy genre, we have Daughters of the Lilies. I already explained how much love I have for Flowers of Etria's ability to cram as much as it can into its story while keeping things simple. But if it left you craving for more, then I highly recommend Daughters of the Lilies. See, Thistle's chased out of town when the locals see her face, and starts living off pocket change. It also doesn't help that she has abilities she doesn't completely understand, and a foreboding figure from her past she likely can't escape from. Finding herself the fourth member in a band of mercenaries, she forms deeper bonds than she would have previously thought possible. I'm not sure where to begin with this one. It has everything I've praised in the past comics, and a little more. World building wise, I came to the sudden realization that most of the fantasy I've consumed is isekai, and most of those isekai were basically the same in world design, so Dawdle was a refreshing experience for me. From the Drat's otherworldly ability to elves being salty about how smart orcs were in the war, so they just made racist novels to belittle them, only for people to make revised, less racist versions of those books because there is a fanbase that kinda likes them. This portion of the story was seemingly one-off, but it also ends up foreshadowing a later reveal that had me double-taking a bunch of prior events in book 1. The characters are great, Org being the orc dad of the group while Lyra and Brent are the quibbling siblings. The story's still early in Thistle's development, but she's integrated with the group pretty well, and I can feel the beginnings of change regarding her crippling self-doubt, which isn't really her fault, but you'll know when you read it. As far as the art goes, I mean, come on, look at it. By the way, part of the footage I'm using is from a fan opening by CM Cameron, link in the description. Read Daughters of the Lilies, now! Octopus Pie follows Eve Ning's post-college life as she deals with problems most people in their mid to late 20s deal with. The story has 53 arcs, and I'm only 12 arcs in, so I don't have a comprehensive idea of the story as a whole. I know I said I was only going to include stories I completely caught up to, but I don't want to rush my experience with this one. At the same time, I also think it'd be a shame to not mention it, so I'll be brief and say this. I like the story so far, and it's one of those stories that I will probably appreciate a lot more in the coming years. As things stand, I can see myself making a solo vid about this one in a few years' time. Now, before we move to the last webcomic, I just want to say a few things. If you made it this far in, sincerely, thank you. To all the 29 creators I looked through, and just creatives working at it in general, you're doing great. I can't express how proud of yourselves you should be for even taking the first step on this journey, let alone multiple chapters in for who knows how long. It's baffling how many of you guys can't pat yourself on the back for that much. You are making progress, whether you see it or not. To anyone that decides to give these series a try and ends up liking it, remember to keep it on your radar, considering how most of these stories have gaps between uploads. That being said, let's move on to the last webcomic of the list. Growing up, for one reason or another, I didn't like Power Rangers. But I'm sure if I showed younger me Chroma Key, he would have enjoyed himself. It stars the ensemble cast of Kim, April, Parker, Emily, and Fuchsia, a group of friends that drifted apart, now reunited to fight the evil Owari as the Super Fighting Mighty Fighters, a group based on the show they grew up watching as kids. The story took me back to my watch of Anohana, and how painful it feels to see a friend group drift. Emily's parents tell her to stop hanging around her friends because they're a bad influence and is transferred to a private school. Fuchsia starts hanging out with a different friend group for reasons I'm inclined to assume are related to their gender identity. I'm only assuming based on when Kim questions her about it years later, and her shaky relationship with her parents. I thought the first fight choreography was well done in balancing their lack of real fighting experience, while also getting accustomed to the passive boost the suits give them. It was also interesting watching the first episode of Mighty Morphin to see where certain ideas deviate, especially since the danger in Chroma Key is emphasized. Like, if any of them were to box without the suit, they'd be finished. One of my favorite characters has to be Luna. This story's equivalent to Zardon, because they've clearly just been winging it since they crashed on Earth. Them summoning the gang to hopefully answer the call to action was purely based on how Toku inspired them. Now, I want to hone into the character that hooked me into the story. Kim. See, all things considered, Kim sucks. She's unapologetically invasive when it comes to her friends' private matters. She doesn't attempt to engage with her friends' interests while forcing them to engage with her own. And don't get me started on how they treat Parker. Yet, somehow, she is chosen to be a mighty fighter. I am as frustrated as I am intrigued, especially since the red suit she dons is synonymous to leadership in Power Rangers. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to see how she grows to not only be a leader worthy of her suit, but also a better friend. I was really having fun with this one, which is why it was unfortunate to catch up and notice that the last post was 3 years ago. The last update being a notice of indefinite hiatus due to the artist being busier, repeated rejections from the publishing industry and its toll on the team's confidence, and the emotional toll of bringing the darker elements of the story to life. Chroma Key is a story that could only have been born from people who not only understand Power Rangers, but also appreciates the medium and what it provides. And that became even clearer from the interview that the writer, Brandon Dumas, promoted on the comic's last post. I hope they're doing well. Please give it a read. All the comics mentioned are down below, and I don't know how to end this. Hey guys, sorry this one took so long to get out. I just really want the script to turn out perfect, especially since this is the first long-form video where I talk about indies. So I would really appreciate some feedback and more webcomic suggestions for the future. With all that said, thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all when I see y'all.